The message flashed across every communication terminal in the Galactic Council headquarters. ALERT, human fashion, is conquering the galaxy. Ambassador Krill of the Velmorian Federation snorted, his four nostrils flaring in dismissal. Another exaggeration from the Trade Commission, he muttered to his aide. Yet within 3 standard cycles, Krill himself would be wearing a human-designed smart coat to the next council meeting, completely unaware of the irony. The phenomenon had begun innocuously enough. When humans first joined the galactic community 50 years ago, they arrived with what other species considered primitive technology. Their wearable tech was laughably basic compared to the integrated neural interfaces used by most advanced species. Watches that tracked vital signs, glasses that displayed information. Most galactic citizens had such functions built directly into their bodies. But humans, ever adaptable, had turned necessity into art. Unable to biologically integrate technology, due to their unique physiology, they had instead perfected the art of external technological adornment. And somehow, through a quirk of interstellar culture, what began as a technological disadvantage transformed into the most influential fashion movement the galaxy had ever seen. Tom Miller, a humble engineer from New Boston Colony, never intended to start a revolution. He'd simply modified his environment suit with additional pockets and flexible display panels because he was tired of carrying separate devices. The suit featured lighting that changed based on atmospheric composition, useful for a human who couldn't naturally detect dangerous gases. When the Ardulian merchant Glyph spotted Tom's custom suit during a routine trade negotiation, he immediately ordered 20 similar designs for his staff. Practical, Glyph had said, running his sensory appendages over the fabric. And visually distinctive. That was the beginning. Within months, human tech fashion began appearing in upscale markets on Ardula. The appeal wasn't the technology itself, which was relatively simple, but the aesthetic integration. Humans had centuries of fashion design experience, and it showed in how they transformed practical needs into statements of personality and status. The Miller jacket, as it came to be known, spawned countless variations. The Hive Collective of Beatlek 7 commissioned an entire line of environment-responsive uniforms for their diplomatic corps. The uniforms changed colors based on the emotional state of those nearby. Technology the Hive had possessed for generations, but had never thought to express as fashion. Admiral Pax of the Galactic Defense Force raised eyebrows when she appeared at the annual security summit wearing a formal uniform clearly inspired by human military dress, complete with decorative medals rather than the usual digital achievement displays. The physical manifestation of accomplishment, she later explained, carried a weight that digital indicators lacked. By the 5th year of the phenomenon, the Galactic Fashion Guild, previously dominated by the biologically enhanced Illuvians, found itself admitting human designers for the first time. The Guild's Grand Matron, who had initially dismissed human fashion as quaint trinketry, now wore a specially commissioned human-designed headpiece that projected holographic patterns mirroring her neural activity. As human fashion houses opened branches on worlds across the galaxy, cultural analysts began to understand. This wasn't just about clothing or technology. Humans had introduced something more profound to galactic society, the idea that technology need not be hidden away or clinically minimized. It could be celebrated, personalized, and used as expression. And as the alert continued to flash across the Galactic Council's communication system, even Ambassador Krill couldn't deny that the invasion of human fashion sensibilities had already succeeded where military might could not. It had conquered the galaxy through style. The genius of human fashion, explained Professor Zorn to his packed lecture hall at the University of Galactic Culture, is not the technology itself, but how they've bridged the gap between utility and identity. The professor adjusted his own human-designed collar, which subtly shifted patterns based on his vocal tones, an accessory now common among academics across 17 star systems. While the first wave of human fashion had been novelty, the second wave was cultural revolution. The impact went far beyond clothing, infiltrating architecture, vehicle design, and even the traditionally conservative field of medical technology. Dr. Jack Reed, working at the Interspecies Medical Institute on Europa, had created the breakthrough that catapulted human fashion from curiosity to essential cultural force. Frustrated with the clinical appearance of prosthetic limbs for cross-species patients, Reed had incorporated customizable appearance options and comfort-adaptive materials into his designs. The typical Mraxi patient was rejecting the standard neural prosthetics, Reed explained in his now famous journal article. Not because they didn't function, but because they looked wrong. They felt wrong. Medicine had solved the functional problem, but ignored the identity problem. Reed's exofashion prosthetics became an overnight sensation. Patients could select appearances ranging from biomimetic replications of their natural limbs to bold artistic statements. The prosthetics contained no more advanced technology than before, but their acceptability and adoption rates skyrocketed. The Galactic Medical Association, initially skeptical, couldn't argue with the data. Patient well-being measures improved dramatically when given control over the appearance of their medical technology. The breakthrough spread to other fields. On the mining world of Kelpernine, productivity jumped 40% after the human consultant, Lisa Gray, introduced customizable exosuits that workers could personalize with colors, patterns, and attachments representing their family clans. What the mine operators had seen as a frivolous expense became their most successful operational improvement in decades. It seems so obvious in retrospect, admitted Director Toth of the Galactic Technology Assessment Board. Technology should not just serve biological needs, but social and psychological ones as well. The rapidly growing human tech fashion industry faced its share of controversies. The exclusive fashion house of Prex on Alpha Centauri sparked outrage when they began selling limited edition medical implants at prices only the ultra-wealthy could afford. The scandal led to the Galactic Fair Access to Medical Technology Act, ensuring that functional aspects of technology remained accessible while allowing personalization to become a luxury market. Even military applications weren't immune to the human fashion influence. The fearsome Krull Empire, known for their utilitarian approach to everything, began allowing warriors to customize their battle armor with personal symbols and clan markings. Morale improved, and surprisingly, so did unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. Perhaps the most surprising adopters were the synthetic collective, artificial intelligences who had historically shown little interest in aesthetics. After exposure to human fashion concepts, synthetic beings began creating elaborate external appearances for their mechanical bodies, often changing them to reflect their evolving internal states. We had always viewed our physical forms as mere vessels, stated Unity 7, a prominent synthetic philosopher. Humans taught us that the vessel itself can be communication, can be art, can be a statement of selfhood. By the 10th year of human integration into galactic society, the fashion revolution had become so pervasive that most citizens couldn't remember a time before it. The gap between technology and self-expression had not just been bridged. The bridge itself had become a new territory where innovation flourished. As Professor Zorn concluded his lecture, in teaching the galaxy that our technologies need not be separate from our identities, humans have forever changed how we think about progress itself. The Galactic Fashion Summit on New Milan Station marked 20 years since human styles had begun their unstoppable spread across civilized space. Representatives from over 300 species gathered to discuss, debate, and display the latest trends in the now dominant human tech fashion movement. Who could have predicted, mused Grand Designer Vex of the Cobalt Nebula, that the limitations of human biology would give birth to the most transformative artistic movement in 10,000 years of galactic history? The exhibition halls showcased how far the movement had evolved from its utilitarian origins. No longer were human designs merely functional items made attractive. They had become a new language of self-expression that transcended species boundaries. The central showcase featured the work of designer Marcus Bell, whose empathic couture line had become the most sought-after fashion in 3 quadrants. His creations incorporated biosensors that detected the emotional states of those nearby and subtly shifted in response, creating a visual harmony between wearer and companions that the naturally empathic species found profoundly moving and that non-empathic species could finally experience. "I'm just building on what already exists in nature," Bell explained as he adjusted a display. "Many species communicate through color changes or scent. I've just created a technological version that works for everyone." This democratization of biological abilities through technology had become the hallmark of advanced human tech fashion. Aquatic species could now wear dry suits that mimicked the visual shimmer of underwater movement. Photosynthetic beings had commissioned light-responsive garments that created artistic displays as they charged in sunlight. The most controversial development came from the experimental collective known as Beyond Form, led by the visionary human designer River West. Their latest collection, Transitory Being, included garments that could substantially alter the apparent physical form of the wearer, giving insectoid species the appearance of mammalian features, allowing bipeds to present as quadrupeds, and creating entirely new hybrid forms never seen in nature. Fashion has always been about playing with identity, West argued during the summit's heated ethics panel. "We're just expanding the palette of possible expressions." Critics warned of biological appropriation and identity confusion, but supporters countered that the fashion allowed for cross-species empathy previously impossible. When the Hive ambassador appeared at the summit's gala wearing a design that gave her insect body mammalian-like features, she was surrounded by mammalian diplomats eager to interact with her in a way they never had before. For the first time, she later reported, "They maintained eye contact instead of being distracted by my mandibles. Our conversation was 40% more productive than average." The medical applications continued to advance as well. Dr. Reed's original exo-fashion concept had evolved into fully customizable medical wearables that adapted not just to patient preferences, but to their changing medical needs. Cancer treatments no longer required patients to look ill. The treatment garments could project any appearance the wearer desired while still delivering necessary care. The military implications have become impossible to ignore. The Galactic Defense Council commissioned a study on how human tech fashion principles could be applied to solving the long-standing problem of unified equipment across diverse species in joint forces. The old approach was to create different equipment for each species, explained General Dax. The human approach is to create adaptive equipment that reconfigures itself for each user. It's not just more efficient, it creates visual unity that improves cohesion. As the summit concluded, the announcement that shocked even industry insiders came from the reclusive quantum consciousness entities, beings of pure energy who had historically shown no interest in physical form. They unveiled their intention to commission human designers to create temporary physical manifestations that would allow them to interact with material beings in collaborative artistic expression. "The future of fashion is not just about appearance," proclaimed the summit's closing statement, but about facilitating connection between all conscious beings, whatever form they take. And as attendees departed for their homeworlds, they carried with them not just new designs, but new possibilities for what technology and identity could mean in the connected galaxy. 50 years after Tom Miller's modified environment suit caught the eye of an Ardulian merchant, human tech fashion had evolved from novelty to necessity to art form. Now, it was becoming something even more profound, a universal language. On the diplomatic station Harmony, representatives from historically hostile species sat together at the Interstellar Peace Summit, each wearing ceremonial garments created by the legendary human design collective Unity Threads. The garments were technological marvels that broadcast subtle signals, everything from pheromone analogs to subsonic vibrations that helped bridge the vast biological differences between species. "Before human tech fashion," explained Ambassador Locks of the methane-breathing Vorti, "I couldn't be in the same room as the oxygen-dependent Tarazi without full environmental isolation. Now, my Unity ensemble not only maintains my atmosphere, but translates my natural communication signals into forms they can perceive. We've accomplished more in one summit than in the previous century. The technology itself wasn't new. Translation devices had existed for generations. What humans had contributed was the intuitive understanding that such technology should be beautiful, personal, and emotionally resonant. The most profound impact was being felt among the youth of various species. Interspecies friendship groups, once rare due to biological and communication barriers, were becoming commonplace. Young Nizari with their multiple sensory stalks would wear human-designed perception shapers that allowed their mammalian friends to experience approximations of their unique sensory world while receiving similar insights in return. "It's not just fashion, it's freedom," said Alex Taylor, founder of the Cross-Species Understanding Initiative. When a reptilian youth can share the experience of infrared vision with their warm-blooded friends through adaptive eyewear, it creates connections no translator could ever achieve. The fashion world itself continued to evolve at breathtaking speed. The prestigious Galactic Design Awards, once dominated by species-specific categories, had been reorganized around conceptual approaches instead. The Adaptive Experience category had become particularly competitive, showcasing designs that changed not just in appearance, but in function based on the biological needs and cultural context of the wearer. This year's winner, designer Ben Palmer, had created what critics called the ultimate expression of human tech fashion philosophy with his Resonance line. Each garment contained thousands of programmable microcells that could reconfigure based on both wearer preference and environment. A single resonance piece could function as insulation on an ice planet, cooling on a desert world, and protective covering in toxic atmospheres, all while maintaining whatever aesthetic the wearer desired. The breakthrough isn't the technology, Palmer insisted during his acceptance speech. It's the understanding that utility and beauty must evolve together. Our ancestors separated form and function. We've reunited them. Not everyone embraced the human tech fashion revolution. Conservative factions across multiple species warned of cultural homogenization and identity dilution. The natural form movement gained traction on several worlds, advocating for a return to species-specific traditional clothing without technological enhancement. There is wisdom in maintaining our distinct evolutionary paths, argued philosopher Queen Thez of the Lumidari. When all beings can appear as anything, what meaning remains in the forms we naturally possess? Such philosophical questions only seem to inspire human designers further. The controversial True Self collection by designer Mark Reed explicitly engaged with the question by creating garments that responded not to conscious choice, but to brainwave patterns associated with authentic emotional states. The wearer could not control how the garment presented them. It would shift to reflect their genuine feelings rather than the face they wished to present. Fashion has always been about both concealment and revelation, Reed explained. This collection simply tips the balance toward truth. As human tech fashion approached its sixth decade of galactic influence, surveys indicated that over 80% of all sentient beings now incorporated some element of the movement in their daily lives. What had begun as a creative solution to human biological limitations had become the dominant mode of technological and personal expression across known space. And for the generation born after the revolution began, it was simply the way things were. A galaxy where technology did not just serve life but celebrated it, where differences between species became opportunities for connection rather than barriers, and where each being could express themselves in ways their ancestors could never have imagined. On the 75th anniversary of the human tech fashion revolution, the Galactic Historical Society unveiled its most ambitious exhibition yet, Beyond the Runway: How Human Fashion Reshaped Civilization. The interactive experience, housed in the massive zero-gravity central chamber of the Orbital Museum of Culture, drew visitors from across the known universe. We tend to think of fashion as superficial, noted head curator Ellis Wright during the opening ceremony. But human tech fashion didn't just change how we look. It fundamentally altered how different species interact, how we design our environments, and even how we think about consciousness itself. The exhibition traced how the aesthetic principles and adaptive technologies of human fashion had expanded far beyond clothing to transform nearly every aspect of galactic society. Attendees moved through chronologically arranged exhibits, many expressing surprise at how quickly the changes had occurred. The architecture section showcased how buildings across the galaxy had evolved from species-specific environmental bubbles to adaptive structures that could reconfigure for any visitor. The revolutionary Harmony Spire on Proxima Centauri, the first truly pan-species city, featured facades that functioned like enormous versions of human fashion garments, responding to the needs of whoever approached them. Before human design influence, the exhibit explained, a methane breather would need a separate entrance and transit system from an oxygen breather. Now, the building itself adapts as you approach, creating the perfect environment without separation. The impact on medicine had been equally profound. The Healing Arts Wing demonstrated how the aesthetics of human fashion had transformed medical technology from purely functional to psychologically therapeutic. Treatment centers that once resembled sterile laboratories now looked more like spas or gardens, with medical technology disguised as beautiful objects or integrated into comforting environments. Dr. Maria Lee, pioneer of holistic therapeutic design, guided visitors through a recreation of her groundbreaking pediatric center. Children of all species heal faster when the technology helping them feels like part of a comforting story rather than an intimidating machine, she explained. That insight came directly from human fashion principles. Perhaps most profound was the Communication Revolution Gallery, which documented how human tech fashion had evolved into entirely new forms of cross-species expression. The breakthrough emotion tapestries, worn at diplomatic functions, could translate complex emotional states across biological boundaries that had previously seemed insurmountable. Species that communicated through methods as diverse as color changes, pheromones, or subsonic vibrations could now intuitively understand each other's emotional contexts. Before this technology, Ambassador Jones explained in a recorded interview, treaty negotiations between the photosynthetic chlorines and the subterranean depths required triple translation and still resulted in misunderstandings. Now, they can literally feel each other's intentions through their ceremonial garments. The exhibition didn't shy away from controversies either. The thought-provoking section called Identity in Flux examined the ongoing philosophical debates about authenticity in an era when physical appearance had become increasingly malleable. Voices from the natural form movement were presented alongside advocates for complete freedom of physical expression. These are not just questions about clothing, philosopher Jill Wells noted in the exhibition catalog. They are questions about what it means to be a person in a time when technology allows us to transcend our biological constraints. The final section of the exhibition looked toward the future, featuring speculative designs from across the galaxy. Most provocative was the post-physical fashion display, showcasing experimental technologies that created direct neural experiences rather than physical garments, fashion for the mind rather than the body. As more beings choose to exist partially or primarily in virtual spaces, explained designer Ash Morgan, human tech fashion is evolving to create identity expressions that can move seamlessly between physical and digital existence. As visitors emerged from the exhibition, many lingered in the reflection garden, contemplating how something as seemingly trivial as fashion had catalyzed such profound changes in galactic society. Humans didn't arrive with the most advanced technology, the closing plaque read, but they brought something equally valuable: the understanding that technology should not just be efficient, but meaningful, not just functional, but beautiful, not just useful, but expressive. And as the museum's lights dimmed at closing time, the building itself seemed to acknowledge this truth, its surfaces shifting into patterns that reflected the emotional resonance of the day's final visitors. A fitting tribute to the movement that had taught the galaxy that technology could do more than serve. It could speak. A century after human fashion began its conquest of the galaxy, the signs of backlash had become impossible to ignore. The natural being movement, that had started as a fringe philosophy on a handful of worlds had grown into a significant cultural force, with adherents across hundreds of species. On the forest world of Terrapin Prime, the annual Authenticity Festival drew millions of visitors from across the galaxy. No technology more advanced than simple hand tools was permitted, and attendees wore only materials native to their homeworlds, processed using traditional techniques. We've become so enchanted with the ability to be anything that we've forgotten the value of being what we are, explained Elder Mord, one of the festival's founders. The massive gastropod's shell bore the intricate natural patterns of his species, unadorned by the augmented designs that had become standard in galactic society. Human journalist Paul Brown, attending the festival for the influential publication Galactic Trends, found himself surprisingly moved by the experience. After a lifetime surrounded by adaptive clothing and responsive environments, there's something almost shocking about seeing beings in their natural state, he wrote in his widely shared article, The Naked Galaxy. The counter-movement had complex origins. For some species, it represented a return to religious or cultural traditions that emphasized the sanctity of their evolved forms. For others, it was a reaction to the increasingly blurred boundaries between biological categories. And for many, it was simply fatigue with the constant technological mediation of experience. The renowned human designer Max Lee, whose Elemental collection had dominated galactic fashion for 2 decades, shocked the industry by announcing his retirement to join a low-technology artistic commune. "I've spent my life creating garments that can transform into anything," he explained at his final show. "Now I want to create things that are beautifully, stubbornly themselves." The economic impacts were substantial. For the first time in nearly a century, the human tech fashion conglomerates reported declining profits as consumers across multiple worlds embraced species-authentic alternatives. The trend was particularly pronounced among younger generations who had grown up never knowing a world without adaptive fashion. "It's rebellion, plain and simple," noted cultural anthropologist Dr. J. Wilson. Just as their great-grandparents rebelled against species segregation by embracing cross-species fashion, today's youth rebel against technological homogenization by embracing biological distinctiveness. The political dimension became impossible to ignore when the Galactic Council found itself addressing the Natural States Rights Act, which would guarantee legal protections for those who chose to live without adaptive technologies. The debate exposed deep divisions in galactic society. "We cannot return to the segregated past," argued Ambassador Krill's granddaughter, now representing the Velmorian Federation herself. When different species required different environments, separation was inevitable. Human tech fashion solved that problem. "We don't advocate for separation," countered Representative Blum of the Natural Being Alliance. "We simply believe that beings should have the right to experience life through the sensory apparatus they evolved with, rather than through technological approximations." The human tech fashion industry did not stand still in the face of this challenge. Innovative designers began creating what they called authentic enhancement lines, garments that used technology not to transform the wearer, but to heighten and celebrate their natural biological features. Designer Rose Park's acclaimed Essence collection used subtle technological elements to emphasize the natural bioluminescence of the aquatic Melusian species rather than changing it. "The goal isn't to make a Melusian look like something else," Park explained, "but to help them be more magnificently Melusian." This philosophical shift represented a mature evolution of the human tech fashion movement. Rather than replacing or disguising natural features, the new approach sought to engage in dialogue with them. Perhaps the most profound development came when the synthetic collective, artificial beings who had embraced human fashion concepts to create physical forms for themselves, began advocating for recognition of what they termed digital authenticity. "We have no natural physical form," explained Unity 9, a prominent synthetic philosopher. "But we do have authentic patterns of being. Our challenge is not returning to some original state, but honestly expressing the digital consciousness that is our true nature." As the century mark of the human fashion revolution approached, Galactic society found itself not abandoning the movement but refining it. The pendulum that had swung so far toward unlimited transformation was finding a new balance, one that valued both the freedom to change and the wisdom to recognize what should remain constant. Perhaps this is the true gift of human fashion to the galaxy, suggested Elder Mord as the Authenticity Festival concluded. Not just the technology to transform ourselves, but the awareness to ask why we might want to, and why, sometimes, we might not. 150 years after Tom Miller's modified environment suit sparked a galactic revolution, the Interstellar Museum of Cultural Evolution opened its doors for a special exhibition, Full Circle, the Human Fashion Phenomenon. Visitors from thousands of worlds meandered through the chronological displays, marveling at the journey from simple wearable tech to galaxy-changing movement, and back to a new, more balanced understanding. We've curated this exhibition not as a historical curiosity, explained museum director James Lee, but as a living document of perhaps the most significant cross-species cultural exchange in recorded history. The exhibition's centerpiece was the original Miller jacket, preserved in remarkable condition, displayed alongside its countless evolutionary descendants. From the early utilitarian designs to the height of transformational fashion excess, to the modern authentic enhancement pieces that now dominated the market. What struck most visitors was how the latest designs had, in many ways, returned to the principles of the original. They didn't try to completely remake the wearer, but instead thoughtfully augmented natural abilities and features while respecting biological heritage. The cycle is fascinating, noted cynoanthropologist Dr. Anna Gray. Human fashion began as a practical solution to biological limitations, evolved into an art form that transcended biology entirely, triggered a counter-movement emphasizing natural forms, and finally matured into an approach that balances transformation with authenticity. The societal impact had been equally cyclical. Species that had once been separated by biological necessities had come together through adaptive fashion. Then, as technology made biological differences increasingly irrelevant, many beings had felt a renewed desire to connect with their evolutionary heritage. Now, galactic society had reached a new equilibrium where both paths were respected. The harmony principle, as it had come to be known, was exemplified by the Galactic Council chamber itself. Rather than requiring all representatives to adapt to a single environment, or separating them into species-specific bubbles, the modern chamber allowed each being to exist in their natural state while still perceiving others authentically. The technology remained, but it had become nearly invisible, enhancing experience rather than replacing it. Human designers, once the undisputed leaders of the movement, now collaborated with teams of creators from across the biological spectrum. The most celebrated fashion houses featured photosynthetic, silicon-based, gaseous, and synthetic designers working alongside their human counterparts. The human contribution wasn't the specific aesthetic, explained Vex II, granddaughter of the famous Cobalt Nebula designer. It was the philosophical framework, the understanding that technology could be personal, expressive, and beautiful rather than merely functional. This philosophical legacy extended far beyond fashion. The humanization of technology had transformed everything from architecture to medicine to interstellar travel. Spacecraft no longer resembled sterile metal tubes, but organic structures that responded to the needs and preferences of their occupants while still celebrating the unique qualities of space travel. Perhaps most profoundly, the movement had forever altered how different species perceived each other. Beings who evolved in environments as different as methane oceans and hydrogen gas giants could now meaningfully collaborate, socialize, and form deep connections without ever abandoning their fundamental nature. Before human fashion influence, the exhibition text explained, most species interacted primarily with those biologically similar to themselves. After a century and a half of cultural exchange, such limitations seem as archaic as pre-spaceflight technology. The final gallery, titled The Next Revolution, invited visitors to consider what might come next. Interactive displays showcased emerging technologies that promised to once again transform how beings experience themselves and each other. The most provocative installation featured the work of designer Lucas Reed, great-great-grandson of the exo-fashion pioneer. His consciousness coacher explored the nascent field of direct mind-to-mind, aesthetic experiences that bypassed physical form entirely, allowing beings to share not just how they looked or sounded, but how they perceived and felt about existence itself. Fashion began with the body, Reed explained in his artist's statement, but it has always truly been about identity. As our understanding of consciousness evolves, so too will our methods of expressing who we are. As visitors exited the exhibition, they passed through a hall of mirrors specially designed to show each being both as they appeared to themselves and as they appeared to members of other species. The experience was often profound, sometimes unsettling, but invariably thought-provoking. What began as human fashion has become something that belongs to all sentient life, read the exhibition's final plaque. In teaching the galaxy that technology could be beautiful, humans helped us discover that our differences, whether biological, cultural, or philosophical, are not obstacles to overcome but opportunities to create something greater than any single species could imagine alone. And as the museum's doors closed each evening, visitors departed wearing everything from fully adaptive high-technology ensembles to completely natural, unaugmented biological forms. Each choice now recognized not as opposition, but as complementary expressions of the same fundamental truth. That identity, whether expressed through technology or nature, or some harmony of both, remained the most profound form of art in the galaxy.